I can't tell you who I am, and I can't tell you the name of the program. But what I can tell you is that if what they say is true, we are in trouble. Now, we didn't make contact in the way you would think we would. We didn't beam out an episode of The Office towards Andromeda and hear back from alien critics. And we definitely didn't meet them face to face. We found another way to communicate, something apparently ancient humans had figured out as well. There are countless dilapidated ancient structures around the world, and some of them, not all, but some, were communication arrays. At least a handful on each continent. I'm sure you'll be able to think of a few after I describe what we did. We've been working on this technology for a while. There had been a long-standing theory that sound has a much larger part in the universe than just being random vibrations. That the universe is simply a bunch of vibrations and sounds, and if you find a way to manipulate those vibrations properly, you could do things that seem impossible. We proved that yesterday. By creating an extremely precise echo chamber and playing certain frequencies into it at precisely the right volumes and the exact right timings, we broke some sort of barrier. Nothing really happened, visually at least. We had run countless tests like these with tiny, minute differences, and this one seemed pretty mundane. There was a slight unnatural thrumming. The glass between us and the echo chamber shook in regular intervals, as if we were playing a bass-heavy song too loudly. The first thing that tipped us off that something was happening was that once we turned the speakers off, the thrumming didn't stop. My 3 coworkers and I could all feel this thrumming in our chests still, kind of like being next to a very loud drum. We talked for a moment before we all fell silent. There was something else now. It wasn't a voice. It was some sort of intelligent vibration. I can't explain it. It was like a voice was inside my chest, but it wasn't speaking. I could just feel what it was saying. My cohorts and I debated on the exact wording afterwards, but we all agreed on the overall messages each time. Like I said, they weren't really talking. So I'll do my best to phrase it in ways that get across what they said, in the way they said it. Whoa, you guys are back? Is what I felt in my chest. My colleagues and I stared at each other in utter confusion. One of them spoke up. Hello? He asked hesitantly. There was a silence for a moment before the thrumming spoke back. I think I have it set right now. Say again? Hello? I repeated back to it in place of the other scientist. Yeah, there it is, he said quickly. You guys figured it out again. That's crazy, it exclaimed. This wasn't what I was thinking the first human-alien conversation was going to go. I wasn't even sure that this was first contact at this point, though. Who is this? What is this? I asked loudly into the open air of our control room. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to give you details like who we are, but what this is the ultimate form of communication in our universe. Your ancestors figured it out briefly too. With some quick deduction on how it was wording things, I think each of us figured out what we were talking to was an alien in origin around the same time. Where are you from? I asked. You have to be close. Hell, with the way we were talking back and forth, they had to be really close. It takes communications to Mars a few minutes to get there, just because that's as fast as light is. If we were talking this quickly back and forth, they basically had to be on Earth. I guess you wouldn't know. We didn't tell your ancestors. We didn't think they'd get it. Let me do some math real quick. It was about a minute before it spoke again. What you see as your observable universe, that's not the whole universe. Not even close. Multiply that by about 15, and that's about how far we are away. And there's a lot past that. It was speaking utter bullcrap now. That was impossible. We'd never be able to communicate. Ever. Physically impossible. We explained that to the chest voice, and we were met by an equal level of confusion. Why are you still using light as a yardstick? It asked incredulously. Suddenly its voice grew slightly dire. You're still not advanced enough. You don't even know. Know what? One of my friends asked. You are dead center in the life abyss. There is no life on any planet around you, or more than 10 of your observable universes around you in any direction. It's a universal mystery how you're even alive. It spoke grimly. Never in my life had I felt smaller, more insignificant, and more alone. It continued. And there is a reason for that. I'm in a crappy band with some old high school buddies. A few weeks ago, our bassist, Pierce, informed the rest of the band that his parents had flown to Europe and left their house for us in Fort Collins. His dad is a sound engineer and has a recording studio in the house. We were ecstatic. So we packed light, made the drive from California to Fort Collins, ready to track a backlog of 8 songs we'd been sitting on. It was mid-spring, and the mountains looked like they were jutting from oceans of blue and yellow wildflowers. The drive was long, but it was nothing short of spectacular. In fact, it was so beautiful that one night after a recording session, Pierce suggested we go camping. I laughed at the idea. They all knew I'd had a somewhat negative experience in the Colorado Rockies a few years ago. But Ronnie and Jeff jumped on board and insisted I not be a wet blanket about it. Pierce recommended some vanilla tent camping at the foot of the mountain, but Ronnie had a bright idea. He wanted to do some astrophotography, and for that, he said, we need to go to a place that's really dark. So he spent some time Googling and discovered Comanche Peak Wilderness, a remote section of a popular national park. What a great idea, I remember chirping. Why, surely nothing could go wrong. Of course, crap did go wrong, and it started on the drive up there. People always forget that evening begins at around 3 p.m. in the deep woods. As soon as the sun dips behind the treetops, the gloom sets in, and things get eerie. Nothing makes me more claustrophobic than the sight of that heavy murk sliding over the world. My body rejects it because my brain knows it's too early for dark. I was on edge the second the paved road gave way to dirt. The other thing people forget is just how loud the woods are at times, and how silent they become at others. The contrast between them can make your head spin. One moment it's a symphony of owls and crickets and toads. Then a branch will snap or thunder will crack and suddenly you're wondering if you've gone deaf. And then, of course, if you think about it too much, you realize just how full the darkness is with all those watching eyes. We went in as deep as we could. We ditched Pierce's truck on the side of some forgotten road and hiked about a half mile into the trees. There was no trail. We followed the GPS to a tiny lake nestled somewhere uphill, where Ronnie could set up his cameras and get a clear view of the sky. We hadn't crossed a solitary soul after entering the preserve a few hours ago, and I felt apprehensive about that fact. We hadn't crossed a solitary soul after entering the preserve a few hours prior, and I felt apprehensive about the fact that no one knew where we were. By dusk, we had set up the 2 tents Pierce had borrowed from his parents. We made a small bonfire pit between them and strung all our food in the trees like you're supposed to do. Ronnie set up his cameras along the shore, and then we waited for nightfall. My anxiety worsened as darkness ate away at the sky. The guys didn't notice. They drank and smoked and carried on. And right when the world went black, leaves began to crunch in the distance behind our tents. A girl emerged from the tree line and stopped at the edge of our little clearing. This girl was probably 8 years old and wore a white dressing gown, like she'd just woken up. She had platinum blonde, almost white hair, and skin so pale she looked like a ghost in the firelight. She wasn't carrying a flashlight or anything. She'd been walking in pitch black woods. She squinted at our fire as if it annoyed her, and let out a few wet coughs. We all just stared at each other in confusion while she studied us. There were no roads or trails in this area, This was not a campground. Her presence made no sense. Jeff eventually called out to her, asking if she was okay, and she replied, "My mom's sick. Can you guys come help us?" Where is she?" Jeff asked. The girl just pointed into the forest. The trees and shadows and mist clustered together to form a great big wall of nope. I gave Jeff a subtle hell no headshake. I might be a coward, but I'm not about to get disappeared by some malevolent wood pixie. Ronnie stood up and asked the girl if they were camping, or if they had a house, or what. The girl just said, "She's really sick. Just follow me." She started coughing again. At this point, all four of us could see that something was wrong. Pierce, probably the clever of us, invited the girl to come warm up by the fire and explain what was going on. I think he knew she'd decline. The girl just turned and walked back into the woods, coughing as she went. Before she vanished, she turned around and said something, but we couldn't be certain of what. I heard, "Soon you'll be a liar." But Ronnie heard, "Soon you'll meet the liar." We built the fire up a lot more, mostly to keep a good perimeter against the darkness. All of us were creeped out, but after a few hours, the guys had mostly forgotten about the girl. They laughed and told stories about drunken escapades. At some point, Jeff and I went to the tree line to take a piss. I walked about 10 steps into the woods and blasted the dark with my flashlight, Jeff following closely behind. I wanted to see if there was a clearing on the other side, or a footpath the girl might have followed, but there was nothing, just a snarl of impassable trees. We heard Ronnie shouting something, so we jogged back to the fire and saw him examining the southern edge of the clearing. That was the direction we left the truck in. Pierce said as we passed by, he thinks he heard more footsteps. I heard them too. Standing next to Ronnie, I could make out a new pair of feet trampling the leaves in the dark. It was louder than the girl had been, probably bigger. "Show yourself," Ronnie shouted again. "We are armed." To my surprise, a woman answered him. She laughed and said, "Don't shoot, just a hiker." We moved back and watched her step into the clearing. She was probably in her late 30s and wore a raggedy hat and an old beat-up pack. I remember hearing Pierce grumble something like, "Real private spot you found here, Ronnie," and I agreed. The hell were all these people bumping into us way out here? The woman introduced herself as Sarah and apologized for scaring us. Ronnie demanded to know what she was doing out here, and she explained that she'd done the full day loop around the mountain, but got lost for a while. She claimed to have found her bearings and now knew where she was going. "You know the way back?" he repeated to her. "Yep. In the dark, without a flashlight." "Uh-huh. I know this area pretty well." Ronnie wasn't buying a word of it. He turned back to the rest of us and said, "We're getting cased, guys. We're about to get robbed. As soon as we fall asleep, campers get killed by thieves and meth heads all the time." "Well, thanks for bringing us out here, dingus," Jeff said. Sarah laughed again. She was real smiley for a woman lost in the woods. In the dark. "I swear it's nothing like that," she said. "Look, I'll be on my way." For whatever reason, I felt the urge to press her further, so I said, "You know you're not the only person we've met out here who's walking around without a light." That fake little smile fell off Sarah's face, and it took the wind right out of my sails. She stared at me like she could see down into the deepest places inside me. "You met the little girl?" she asked with a blank expression. My bandmates all exchanged looks of incredulity. Sarah collected herself, and a new smile spread across her face. She said, "Don't listen to anything that little brat says. She's a liar, through and through. Look, why don't you guys hike down to the ranger station with me? It'll be safer together." She pointed behind herself, into the woods. Something lit up in my brain. This was the second time a stranger had tried to coax us into the dark. We weren't going to get robbed. Something much worse was about to happen. Pierce seemed to have come to the same conclusion, and he invited Sarah to instead join us around the fire. As he did with the little girl, he knew Sarah would decline. The strange woman told us she had to get back before it got any colder, and with that, she turned and hurried into the woods. After a long debate about what to do, we decided that hiking back to the truck was the fastest way to get lost or killed. We hadn't used a trail, and our phone batteries were low. Every time the wind blew, it set 1,000 trees groaning and shivering, which made it impossible to orient ourselves by sound. And it was so black that if I stared into the darkness long enough, I started having minor hallucinations as my brain tried to make sense of the void. So we kept the fire blazing and agreed to sleep in two-person shifts. Since Pierce and I were the soberest of the bunch, we agreed to stay up first. But only an hour into our watch, we started hearing the coughs and sputters of a little girl in the distance. I followed Pierce to the lake's edge, which lay about 30 yards from our camp. There we heard an eerie voice wafting on the breeze. I saw the silhouette of a person milling about near the water a few hundred feet away, and realized it was the girl. She was wandering around in the dark, singing. We booked it back to the fire and woke up Jeff and Ronnie, alerting them to the girl's presence. But as we discussed what to do, another voice erupted from nearby and began singing as well. It sounded just like Sarah. Pierce and I jumped into the tent with the other guys and sealed it up, terrified that the time had come for whatever these creeps had planned. But no one approached our camp. The two people just walked in slow half circles behind the trees, singing together in a language I couldn't identify. Ronnie always keeps a menacing-looking trail knife on him when we go hiking, and he scrambled for it while shouting that he'd butcher anybody who came near us. His yelling caused the people outside to go quiet for a few moments. I pulled out my phone to record some of the voices, but my hands were shaking so hard I could barely operate it. I caught a bit of the girl, but then something even weirder happened. None of us are certain of how many people were in those woods, but we heard a third voice at that moment. It was deeper and guttural, like the sound of some night predator stalking around in a jungle. I'm not certain the noise was made by a person. Ronnie and Jeff believe the sound is coming from the girl who has a coughing fit and then begins channeling some demonic voice. Pierce and I think it's a third person or an animal that was with them, waiting for us to leave the safety of the bonfire. Here's the sound of the recording. Sorry for the poor quality. I have a crappy phone.
Turn your fucking... Turn off the light. Listen.
After the commotion, the activity in the woods died down for a while. The guys and I remained inside the tent, terrified, only leaving its shelter to throw more wood on the fire about once an hour. None of us slept, and for the rest of the night, we occasionally heard distant singing, laughing, coughing, and the occasional whisper. Sometimes the girl would say, "Can you help us?" in the exact same tone, as if her voice had been recorded and replayed over and over. We also heard someone, probably Sarah, climbing a nearby tree and shouting things like, "I see you boys," and "Let's go together, it's safe now." And that was it. By dawn we were exhausted from terror and half frozen in the tent. The noises stopped and the people, if they were people at all, had long abandoned their efforts to lure us into the dark. We packed up and hiked back to the truck, which had thankfully not been ransacked. As far as I'm concerned, the next time I go camping, it'll be in a treeless desert in Arizona, and I'll see if I can get Ronnie to post some of those night sky shots. She's cheating on you, you know. My wife was looking at me with the eyes that I fell in love with, bright blue with a tear running down her cheek from spending the last 5 minutes laughing too hard. She wiped a tear away and playfully slapped me on the chest as I pulled her in and ran my fingers through her sides, causing her to burst out in laughter again. It was in this joyous, casual moment that I first heard the voice. I looked around for the accuser and saw nothing. With a deep breath, I passed it off and sat down on the couch, beckoning for Eliza to do the same. She walked over with a suspect look on her face, and I promised that I wouldn't tickle her anymore tonight. Once she sat, I wrapped her up in my arms and flipped on a movie that we would inevitably fall asleep to. Isn't it strange? You almost never have nights like these anymore, but every once in a while. Did you hear that? I asked, shooting up from my relaxed position. It sounded so clear, like whoever was talking was right behind us. Hear what, sweetie? Her face was as perplexed as mine, but clearly for a different reason. I wiped a bead of sweat off my forehead and took one more look around the living room and kitchen area to no avail. I don't know. I'm not feeling too well, and I think I'm just going to call it a night. I'm sorry. Rain check for a movie tomorrow night? I replied, leaning down over the couch to give her a kiss on the forehead. Oh, okay, she replied, her tone suggesting that she was disappointed. I did feel bad, but I just needed some sleep. When she got up to follow me to bed, I told Eliza that she should stay up and get some of her work done, and that me going to bed early shouldn't mean she has to as well. With a nod of agreement, we parted ways for the evening. When I got to the bedroom, I shed my daytime clothes and crawled into our king-size mattress. The longer I laid down, the more I thought to myself that I had overreacted. Surely I had been imagining things, and there was no reason for me to be as freaked out as I was. After about an hour, I was about to get up to rejoin my wife in the living room when I felt a pressure in the crook of my neck, right where Eliza would lie her head at night when we would cuddle up before falling asleep. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I felt the phantom pressure stroking my chest now, just as Eliza would. Shh. I mean you no harm. I just want to show you the love you deserve. The voice was smooth like honey. If it weren't for the extreme circumstances, I would have found it relaxing. Perhaps a voice that would fit well in a meditation video. My eyes went wide, and I tried my hardest to struggle, but my body wouldn't cooperate. It felt as though a 1,000-ton weight were sitting on each of my limbs, making it impossible to move. Now, as a child, I was obsessed with everything paranormal, and I spent years of my adolescence trying to contact one spirit or another. I tried summoning circles, the elevator game, Ouija boards, you name it. Nothing was ever successful, of course, but it was oh so entertaining. As an adult, I had to put away those childish adventures and stored them, as well as all of the knowledge of otherworldly beings, in a far recess of my brain. Therefore, despite knowing exactly what this being was and how to combat it, I would never be able to recall that information in time. What do you want from me? I thought inwardly, hoping that whatever was subduing me was able to hear my thoughts. I just told you, my dear. I want to show you the love that you deserve. I want to show you that girl that you call a wife has been lying to you for years. Don't you dare speak about Eliza that way, I shouted, with as much animosity as my internal voice could muster. I can prove it. I'm going to let you go. Ask her about Marcus. I will be here for you afterwards. As soon as the voice finished its sentence, All of the weight was removed from my body, and I jerked upwards. I got out of bed and flipped back on the light. I swear I saw a flash of blonde hair in the mirror on the door at the moment the light spilled throughout the room, but when I turned around, nothing was there. I peered into the mirror, contemplating what to do. It could be crazy for me to actually believe. It could be crazy of me to actually believe whatever it was that was just speaking to me, right? I've been with Eliza for 14 years, and we have been nothing but happy the entire time. I mean, sure, we had our spats, but every couple does. It's healthy to have arguments from time to time. Also, we spent most of our time together. Surely I would notice if she had gone long enough to actually cheat. Then again, it couldn't hurt to ask. I didn't have to phrase it as an accusatory statement. If the name Marcus rang a bell, then I would be able to tell by her reaction. Eliza is terrible at hiding her emotions. Just as I made a decision, the door opened and Eliza came into the bedroom, already half naked. She met my eyes and gave me a devilish smile before crawling onto the bed, looking back at me like she wanted to play. I sat down next to her, not in the mood. This is going to sound crazy, but I need to ask you something. My eyes didn't meet her as I spoke, and she immediately realized that gravity of my mood. Is this about what happened earlier? Eliza ran her fingers down my arm as she moved closer. I shrugged them off. Tell me about Marcus, I said, looking up to meet her gaze for the first time in what felt like eternity. It only took a moment to realize that whatever entity spoke to me earlier was telling the truth. Eliza's face became pained and her voice began to stutter as she looked for an explanation. I needed none. I told you, come be with me. I spent the next week in a motel. To say I was depressed would be an understatement. I had the paperwork for divorce filled out and sitting on the scratched wood dresser in front of me, crying as I signed the final few forms. I'll make you breakfast tomorrow morning. We can be beautiful together. Who are you? I shouted. The voice hadn't left me alone since the first time I heard it. I've been in love with you for as long as I can remember. You can't see me, but I've always been here. I know this is strange. That's why I waited this long to make contact, but I couldn't stand to see things go the way they were anymore. As the being spoke, I received another text from Eliza, trying to apologize and explain more. I threw my phone at the wall and it shattered into a million pieces. A manic giggle escaped my lips as I imagined the android as my heart. How poetic, I thought. How can you love me? I have no idea who you are. I have no idea what you are. I know this is hard to comprehend. I felt a phantom touch on the small of my back once more and I spun around, throwing my hands wildly around. I couldn't take it anymore. Was I crazy? Stop touching me, I screamed, throwing a fist down onto the dresser. Pain shot through my hand. I had probably broken at least a pinky finger. Don't you understand? I'm doing this to protect you. You should be thankful I rid you and the world of that cheating whore. Let me show you. The voice was getting more impatient and angry. It sent shivers down my spine before finally the pressure went away and I felt the ghostly presence in the room behind me leave. I felt alone for the first time since I left my real home. Wait, did that thing say rid the world of my wife? I let out a grunt and put my head down on the desk. Why was this happening? I'm a good person. I work hard. I've always been honest and faithful. I don't deserve this crap. The next morning, there were scrambled eggs and Canadian bacon drizzled with maple syrup on the counter, still steaming when I woke up. That was my favorite meal. How did it get here? Good morning. Would it be okay for me to speak? We need to talk, I started, remembering what the voice had said last night. Of course. What is it, my dear? Last night you said that you rid me and the world of my wife. What do you mean, rid the world of her? Did you harm her? I did a service to you. People like that don't deserve to live any longer. Now calm down and eat your breakfast. A sense of overwhelming calm washed over me, and I looked over at the kitchen counter to notice what had been prepared for the first time. Did you make this? I asked, slowly making my way over to the delicious smelling feast. I did. I know it is your favorite. I know it's your favorite. How? I inspected each piece of bacon, making sure it wasn't some trick that my broken mind was playing on me. But it felt real. It smelled real. And it certainly tasted real. In fact, as I took the first bite, I thought that it might have been the best cooked breakfast I had ever had. I also reflected on the fact that it might have been crazy for me to so willingly trust this food that appeared in such a strange method. But at this point, I hardly cared. I told you, I've loved you for a long time. I know everything about you. Normally, I would tell you how incredibly creepy that is, but honestly, this food is so good I'm willing to let it slide. I finished every last bite in no time. It must have been days since I had any decent food. Would it be okay if I touched you again? I guess that would be okay. As soon as I responded, I felt a familiar pressure of hands being wrapped around my waist and a body being pressed up against my back. I turned my head around, but nothing was there. Not that I expected anything different. Why can't I see you? I asked, feeling the desire now to know who or what it was that was providing me with these small comforts. I think you know why. I do not exist in the same plane as you, and while I can interact with it to a small degree, showing myself in a visible form would be too much for my spirit to take, and I would pass on to the next world. If you would like, however, I can visit you in your dreams. I think I would like that. 2 years have passed since then. I've since learned that my new friend's name is Lisa, and that she really does have my best interests in mind. She stays with me all the time, and although I have tried to date a few different real girls, none of them seem to have the connection that we do. Every night, Lee visits me in my dreams, and every night she looks different. Some days she appears as a supermodel-esque tall brunette with long legs and a curvy body, and other nights as a petite blonde with glasses and messy clothes. It seems that she knows exactly what I want. Always. We now share a one-bedroom condo off on the countryside. Breakfast is served every morning, always piping hot and precisely what my morning brain is fiending for. I've asked Lee if she is able to enjoy that same food that I am, and she promises that on her side, she's eating the same thing. It feels strange, but somehow I feel happier now than I ever had before. Sure, we have our fights, which are mildly irritating, given the fact that she can just hold me down where I am and scream into my mind until I admit that she's right. But she is, after all, always right. And although I know that I'll never be able to truly see her, I know in my heart of hearts, she's the most beautiful girl I've never seen.